We're going to go over the biggest winners and losers of the Fontaine meta. What characters have changed, have gotten more powerful, less powerful? How do the new characters stack up to the old? What can we learn about the new characters that will help us predict what's coming in the future and what will be strong going forward and what it means for the game? And how do the new Fontaine mechanics and enemies shape the way that meta will be looked at? Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. I would like to preface this video by saying just because I'm going to be talking about meta does not mean that it really matters. I think it's just fun. I think it's fun. I think it's interesting. You don't need the most effective tactics available to 36 star the Abyss. So if you don't care, then that's fine. I find it very fun to talk about who is strong and who is weak. And I know other people do as well. It's fun to rank things. It's fun to talk about synergies and changes and who is stronger and who is weaker. It's just enjoyable. If you don't find that enjoyable, no problem. And I'm not telling you to inform your wishing decisions or your character building decisions or even your team building or even how you play based on the meta. That is not what this video is about. And that's not what I believe in. I don't play that way. Yoimiya is probably my most overall used character. She's absolutely not meta. I really enjoy using Monopyro Dea carry. It's definitely not meta. I just finished building my Ningguang. I'm very excited to play her. She's not meta. That's fine. For me, enjoying playing the game and who I build and who I wish for and that kind of thing is separate for me than talking about the meta and who is strong and who is weak and who is worth it, quote unquote. That's a separate issue for me. And hopefully you can watch the video for what it is, in that just my attempt as an unbiased as possible discussion based on all of my testing. Let's get into it. Starting off with winners and losers. I know I put some characters on the thumbnail with some down, and the truth is, although in some ways you could definitely pitch these characters as having lost in the new Fontaine meta, and you can definitely make the argument that they're going down, realistically, no character is worse off, right? Because just because, you know, Neuvillette has come out and maybe he has usurped Ayato as the best on-field Hydro DPS, that doesn't now all of a sudden mean that Ayato is bad. It doesn't even mean that he still doesn't have his niche, and it doesn't even mean that in some ways he's not stronger than Neuvillette. He's maybe just not as big and universal as he used to be. So let's start with that. Let's rip the band-aid off. First character is Ayato. Now, I don't actually think that he's a worse character. He's just not the strongest AoE option in Hyperbloom anymore, for example. But he still way outperforms Neuvillette in Burgeon, obviously. And I would argue that he still outperforms Neuvillette in Nilou teams as well. In addition, he is very, very flexible, and with his off-field application, I would prefer Ayato in Freeze, even though I don't really like him that much in Freeze. As you can see, there are a number of situations where Ayato beats out Neuvillette. I think the biggest downside for Ayato versus Neuvillette is Neuvillette doesn't require to be tied to the hip to Bennett if he wants to have high personal damage. Because he scales on HP, there's no HP buffer like Bennett. He doesn't have to be balanced around that, so Neuvillette kind of just does more damage no matter where you put him. And so I tend to prefer Neuvillette as the better character overall, but Ayato is still great. Jack of all trades and still a couple great niches. Next is Eula. A lot of people I've been seeing saying that Freminet at C6 can catch up to or surpass Eula. I personally don't think this is the case from what I've seen, and after talking to some other creators, they also agree that this is not the case. I kind of put her in the L just because there's still no hint that Fontaine is going to do anything to help physical, and so it's not that she's worse, it's just that she stayed the same, which is, you know, most characters that are there's most characters in the game, but she is underserved by the Genshin meta. They're not doing anything to help her out, and I would just really like to see Hoyoverse throw us a bone and give us an off-field physical character that can maybe battery her or that has some synergy with her in particular. And now that they have Freminet, making an off-field physical character or buffer might be more viable. There's also a trend towards healers being better with some of the new Fontaine mechanics. Maybe something happens in the future that makes Mika better, which makes Eula better. We'll just have to wait and see about that, but we'll talk about that more when we get to the mechanics section. Also in the same boat that they're not getting worse, but they're not getting better, is Xingqiu and Yelan. So both of these characters they utilize normal attacking characters, and so far the two very strong units that we've had don't use normal attacks at all. That would be Lini and Neuvillette. Now, does that make Xingqiu and Yelan worse? Absolutely not, but it seems that Hoyoverse is very aware of normal attacking characters. Realistically, they're very aware of Xingqiu and Yelan being OP, and so they're very aware of making characters that don't synergize with them so that you're not always forced to play with these characters. I think this is good from game design perspective. It just means that, you know, he's not always the best character for your team. team, and same with Yelan. I think that Xingqiu has been a little bit less. I think both of them still have areas that they still do contribute to the meta. Yelan's damage percent buff is just showing more and more value when she does synergize with future characters, because even characters like Neuvillette, if you want to run Hyper Neuvillette, you actually can use Yelan, which is really funny, just for her damage percent bonus. Now, obviously, that seems extremely cope and extremely weird, but it is actually, his multipliers are actually so good that it's something you can do if you have a high investment Neuvillette. And that just goes to show how valuable of a unit Yelan is, and for her buff to be, you know, when she does work with, say, an HP scaling character who actually does use normal attacks, then that's a very valuable unit to have. And similarly, Xingqiu's defensive utility has also gotten more valuable recently, because we have more and more enemies that can just one-shot you, and that are, especially looking at the dancers and some other enemies that just do a ton of damage. So having Xingqiu be able to reduce the damage taken by 42% is very, very useful to not getting one-shot. I found myself bringing him against the dancers just for that. It is a bit of a downside again that he applies element to yourself, because often that can make you easier to be frozen or something else. But nevertheless, you know, even though they don't synergize as well with some of the new characters, they do still have things that make them very, very valuable, and they're kind of like a down but also up in another way. There's a lot of mono element teams recently, and so Sucrose has seen less use on with a lot of the new characters, like with Kazuha being an option to buff mono element teams. Neuvillette, Linny, it's looking like Risley, he probably won't use Sucrose. It's going to be too hard to get any sort of double swirl with a melt team. So we haven't seen basically any new teams for Sucrose. It's all been Kazuha. Now, that's not to say Kazuha is like best in slot on every single team. Linny doesn't always, well, he pretty much always wants Kazuha, but Neuvillette doesn't always want Kazuha. Risley won't necessarily want Kazuha. We don't know what the Archon is going to do to shake things up. So it's not like, you know, Kazuha's winning by every metric, but I definitely would say that Sucrose is seeing less value, especially when you compare her to how she was in Dendro. With Dendro, she was almost considered as good as Kazuha, or by a lot of people just as good, because the EM buff was so valuable. We're not seeing a lot of characters react with Elemental Mastery lately, so Sucrose is kind of a bit of a downward trend, but still very broken. The grouping is still very valuable. That is another thing though, the grouping, I would say, favors Kazuha's more, and actually even favors Venti more. I'd say characters like Kazuha and Venti with that stronger suction is more useful than Sucrose. With Sucrose, you still have to, it's not that you can't use it, but it requires a lot more skill by the user to AI manipulation and things like that. It's not as brain dead. So I think Sucrose is like, she's still one of the best units in the game, but she's just fallen off slightly from the god tier she was in Dendro. I mentioned Xingqiu and Yelan being down because they don't have synergy with normal attacks. I guess you could put Toma in there, but I feel like it would have been so nice if Neuvillette could use Toma, right? If Linny could use Toma, that would have been like, that would have been so good for Linny to have that pyro shield, like, and the charge attack bonus, or for Neuvillette to use Toma to trigger Burgeons, or just to use him as a defensive option. It would have been really good, and Toma would have gotten a nice glow up, but because he synergizes specifically with normal attacks, he hasn't been. So again, hasn't gotten worse, but it's just something to keep in mind. There's obviously a ton of characters that have been mildly affected, that are slightly better, slightly worse. I won't go over those because that's just boring, but some characters that have gotten a glow up. The first one is Dea. She is actually a good option as a defensive option for Neuvillette on Hyperbloom teams. You can use her instead of Layla on that team and get that infinite interruption resistance. You can even use her last in the rotation. And the fact that she has a really good place on a really good team with a good character is a massive improvement to what she used to have. Is she better than Zhongli or Layla on that team? No, but she is a fully viable and fully usable alternative. And so just the fact that she even has a place where she's useful and on a really good team, no less, is massive. She wasn't so hot with Linny. I was really down on Dea, and I didn't quite use her right or test her quite enough on my Neuvillette for my first Neuvillette video. But now, after playing with her more and talking to more people, especially the fact that you can use her last in the rotation without losing like Bennett buff uptime, because that's kind of why she doesn't work so well with Ganyu, is that you have to, if to use her last and maximize her interruption resistance, you lose Bennett buff uptime for Ganyu, but to use her before, then you lose her interruption resistance. So with Neuvillette, you don't have to sacrifice either of those. The only downside is a bit circle impact compared to Layla, but in a lot of cases that doesn't really matter. It is a fairly big circle, so overall massive glow up for Dea. It is just for one team, but that's way better than, it's by far the best team she's had so far. I don't have Venti on my account yet, but actually Venti, his synergy with Novelette is good. His synergy with Linny is decent. And a lot of the new enemies are at least partially, if not fully ventiable, which make him a really strong option. I think he's slightly better than he used to be. I think Fischl has had a really good glow up. Obviously, she's received the new artifact set, really big deal for her. And every character that uses or drives Fischl has gotten a tiny bit of a buff, like Keqing or Lisa are slightly better because of Fischl. And that's all we have for current characters and their changes. I will be going over my speculations based on my predictions of the Archon, but we're going to go over that last. Finishing up with characters, we've talked a lot about the new characters, but let's dive in and talk about where they sit in the meta right now. Lynette, in terms of meta, I would say is really not quite it. She's a decent free-to-play option, and she has a decent driver option at C6, but it's nothing new. It's nothing better than others. She's decent, which is great for people who like Lynette. Not so great otherwise. Not really ever worth it for power. Fremine, we talked about him earlier, hasn't seen the light of day in terms of meta strength. He does have good synergy with Hyperbloom team, but it's nothing that like takes him to another level. It doesn't make his teams, like his Hyperbloom teams aren't necessarily like better than Eula Hyperbloom teams. Neither of them have anywhere close to the best Hyperbloom teams available. And it's not that he's not viable. I like that he's viable, but he's definitely hasn't done anything to shake up the meta, except maybe full copium hint to us that Hoyo has not completely forgotten about physical. It has to feel like Fremine and Mika and Eula are all physical and all kind of underpowered. Surely there's some cracked physical buffer that will complete this team, right? Surely. That's the 4 stars. On to the 5 stars. I think Linny is a really good character. I think his mono power teams are great, especially if you have high investment and you can get away, whether that's artifact investment or with a signature weapon. If you can get away with Zhongli on the team for that damage reduction, that interruption resistance reduction, you can go Linny, Bennett, Kazuha, Zhongli. That's really good for his overall survivability, because if you don't have Zhongli and you're running a glass cannon team with Xiangling, it is the better team, but it is really cringe against enemies that are aggressive, and there's a lot of aggressive enemies in late Sumeru and in Fontaine, and we're seeing a lot of aggressive enemies in the Abyss, and it feels pain to play Linny without someone like Zhongli. So although I think he's good, I do think he still falls just behind the likes of the very top DPSs like Hu Tao, and I think he falls more in line with Cleet because of those issues. I still think he's a very excellent character, and his damage is insane, but the fact that it's so easy to have your charge shots interrupted by the aggressive enemies just make me not put him up there with the likes of the top tier DPS like Novelette. I would definitely say that he's a top tier DPS. There's just no question about it. Is he the very best on-fielder in the game? I think it's possible that he is, especially if you have his signature. His signature is so good for him. The biggest increase of any character's signature in the game, and he already does such a high portion of the team's damage that it's a huge upgrade for him, and he's a very powerful character because of it. Well, not just because of that, but because he's Hydro, because he does unlimited damage. And this brings me into talking about the trends. We're seeing a couple different trends with the characters. We're seeing not reliant on their burst. So I think this trend started in late Sumeru, or maybe it's just been here and there, but for sure, well, actually, I don't know if it started in late Sumeru. In Sumeru, it was 50-50 whether a character relied on their burst or not, but the emphasis is way down on the burst in Fontaine compared to before. Linny, Novelette, Risley, none of them rely on their burst a ton. Like, they do use their burst, and it is necessary to have their burst, but none of them need like a ton of ER. If they don't have their burst, it's not the biggest deal. Like, the only reason why our man needs his burst is to get more water droplets, which is important, but it's not like the end of the world if you don't need a ton of ER subs. It's not something that needs to consume your mind while building Novelette, whereas someone like Sino, like, everything is gone if you don't have her burst. Obviously Raiden, Yelan, etc., characters like that. And just something I've noticed anyways. I've also noticed a trend to very powerful signature weapons and very powerful early constellations on every character. With Linny, with Novelette, with Risley, all of them get a lot out of their early constellations and out of their signature weapons. A lot more, I would say, than the majority of the Sumeru cast. Especially this trend to powerful C1s and big power spikes early on, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, although it does tingle my spidey senses a little bit that, like, it's more achievable for free-to-plays now to get a power boost to their account with these early constellations, with these 5-star weapons that may justify Hoyo in making the Abyss ceiling even harder in the future. Generally, the Abyss tends to get easy at the beginning of a region and get harder and harder and harder throughout the region, and then go back to easy, but it never settles down to as easy as it was in the beginning of the last region. And so I think it's interesting to think about that trend that's been going on for a long time, and now they're kind of putting more good early constellations and good 5-star weapons. Like both Linny and Novelette get a lot out of their early constellations and out of their weapon, Novelette especially, and Risley as well, but Linny too. So if you're someone who plans on keeping up with 36 starring the Spiral Abyss and always doing that no matter what, it might be worth it to select your favorite units, whoever they happen to be, and do things for them and start vertically investing for them. If your favorite character is Raiden, it might be worth to think about that C2. It might be worth getting a C2 Nahida if, Sino's your guy and getting a signature weapon, or working towards that C2 Yelan, that C1. But then you look at those and you say, oh, but I could also just get R1 Novelette and that'll be a big power boost, or C1 Novelette, or R1 for my Linny. Things like that. So I'm not saying that new players should do that, but it's once you have all your favorite characters, once you have great teams for your favorite characters, then I think it's more valuable than it used to start investing into early constellations. I don't recommend spending money. You don't need to spend money to have fun with this game. You also don't need to 36 star the Spiral Abyss to have fun with this game. Plenty of people have tons of fun with this game without 36 starring the Spiral Abyss. You don't have to feel like you have to keep up with everything, but I do think that if you do care about that, and if you do have fun with that, like if I wasn't building and testing every character at C0, I would absolutely work towards C2 Yelan, work towards C2 Raiden 100%, because and a C1 R1 Hu Tao, and I would skip some characters that I don't care about as much, like Linny and Novelette. I probably wouldn't be, or Risley, I probably wouldn't be wishing for these characters in favor of making my other ones stronger, just because that's how I like to play the game. And I like to, especially after investing a lot of time into the game, I like to feel like I'm destroying things because I've, spent that money, or not that money, but spent those artifacts and that time grinding. I want to feel powerful, and artifacts can be RNG. They can be really hard to get good artifacts, and so to be able to compensate for your artifact bad luck with dedicated saving for your favorite character can definitely be worth it. Again, I always have, and I'm gonna put a disclaimer, I always have people disagreeing with me on this. I'm not saying that it's good to do for everyone. I'm not saying it's worth it for everyone. It's only if you like to keep up with meta and you want to make your favorite characters as strong as possible so that you can clap things with them, that I would recommend them. But I want to give you the freedom, because a lot of people say don't do that, right? A lot of people say don't wish for constellations, don't wish for 5-star weapons. I want to give you the freedom to say, hey, if that's how I want to play the game, it's okay for me to save up my Welkins to get my C2 Raiden, or to get my C2 Yelan, or to get my C1 R1 Novelette. Okay, for new enemies and new mechanics, I am surprised that we're not seeing more emphasis and relevance put onto the Uja and Numa mechanics. I thought that Uja and Numa would be a really big part of Fontaine, and it's really not. I'm shocked. The new monsters are much more focused around their elemental shields. Like this one has the electro shield. It's different than most electro shields though, because it's a shield that gives resistances rather than just purely blocking damage. And you can actually apply other elements to him while he has that shield, so you can still swirl to remove that shield, which is nice. But yes, you can use Uja and Numa for them, but they're much more focused on those elemental checks rather than the resistances, which is just fascinating to me. These guys as well, this guy as well, like it's not really about having your Fontaine units and going against them. It does give the Fontaine units a nice boost, but often I don't even notice it. Like it's like as long as you have the damage, or as long as you have the right element, you're fine, which I'm honestly shocked about. I'm very happy with it, don't get me wrong. Genshin had like a crossroads, and I was honestly truly worried that it was going to force you, if you want to keep up with meta, it forces you to play Fontaine characters, and they did not do that. Now it is still possible that they do that in the future, but as of now, it really does not seem like they're trending in that direction, and they're just focusing on these more elemental shield mechanics or Fontaine characters, which is perfect. It's the perfect thing that they could have done, and props to Genshin for doing the right thing. They don't always do the right thing, but I'll give W's where they're deserved, and they're deserved right here. All right, and the final thing is, what will Furina do to the meta? Now, I have to be very careful here. I'm not going to talk about any sort of leaks. I made a prediction video video right here, before we had any information on her kit, before anyone dreamed up anything, I made a prediction video because I think it's pretty obvious, at least I thought it was pretty obvious what she was going to do. And I still stand by everything what we said. If you want proof, this was 4 weeks ago. It was way before we received any information. I thought it was pretty obvious what we were going to do. Here's what I said. I said she's going to deal with HP manipulation. She's probably going to provide HP manipulation, and she's probably going to do something with it. I predicted that she would either buff or buff herself. I thought most likely she's going to do more damage when HP is manipulating. Now, is that what will happen? We don't know for sure yet. Nothing's official. We'll have to wait for the live stream and see whether she'll buff others, well, she'll do more damage. Whatever it is, there'll be some positive benefit for HP manipulation. And my prediction was based on the Maria Shisei Hunter artifact sets, based on all the new characters reducing their damage, based on the bond of life with healing, I figured she's either going to heal or she's going to take away HP, or somehow she's going to do both, and she's going to either buff or she's going to buff herself, or whatever she's going to do. She's going to do some sort of off-field hydro damage. I predicted AoE hydro damage to separate her from Xingqiu. I predicted not as powerful hydro application AoE. Like that's what I predicted. No dreams, no other information like that, just my pure prediction. Now, how does that affect the cast potentially if this were somehow to be true? I think there's a good chance that healers get better. It's possible that she heals herself and that would make other healers worse. But the reason why I thought that seems so strange is characters like Kokomi already are a hydro AoE applicator healer. And what's she gonna do? Just completely power creep Kokomi? There's no way. So either she's gonna power creep her or she's gonna complement with her, because you can't have something to do with HP drain and manipulation without either power creeping her or working with her. So I think that healers will get a buff. And I think that it's a fair assumption since a lot of healers are considered lower tier because they don't do enough on top of their healing. Like they tried with the clam set to make healers more viable and it kind of worked, but a lot of them like Jean, they can't run the clam set. So what are you gonna do? Like you need to run VV with Jean. Like you can't run clam Jean and expect to do well. And a lot of the characters we consider as lower tier, whether it's Barbara, whether it's Chi-Chi, whether it's Dory, whether it's Noelle, whether it's Sayu, a lot of them it's because they heal their power, and it's because their power balance is balanced around their healing, and they kind of don't give them enough damage or enough utility or enough function. So I think that Furina, it'd be nice, and like I think it'd be good, and I think it'd be a fair bet to say that Genshin they want to bring up the lower characters, which is something they always do. It's something they did with Kuki, it's something they did with other characters, the Yaimiko, and they want to bring up the lower characters. And I do think that there's a strong possibility that healers get better because they're underserved, and we can safely assume that Furina will have some kind of HP manipulation. Now, her being a hydro character, I think it'd be silly if she didn't apply hydro, and I think it'd be silly if she required normal attacks to function. So I think we can safely assume that she's going to work with Linny and with Novelette, even if she's not optimal with both of them, that at least she will work with them. So I think some off-field, unless she's on-field DPS, which I highly doubt again because we have Novelette already, she's going to be an off-field hydro applicator of some kind. And I think that makes some other interesting things. Like I think Tighnari could become a Hyper Bloom or Quick Bloom character, which I think is really cool. I think that Hyper Bloom synergizes really well with his kit because he's a single target character. But right now, like what can you do? Run Kokomi for Hyper Bloom? Not so great. So now you can run, I'm gonna guess you can do a Furina Tighnari team. If you can do that, it's totally possible that Alhaitham will also be improved. But I think Tighnari, this will open up a whole new play style for him, which is really, really neat. Maybe a Vape Amber? Surely that's not hope, right? Surely. And maybe Vape Dea. Who knows? We can hope, can't we? We can dream. We can dream because she also doesn't use normal attacks, right? So maybe a Vape Dea team will be good, or reverse Vape, or who knows? We'll have to wait and see. A couple things I missed. Beto is a character that also doesn't require normal attacks and also has damage mitigation. So she's a character that has seen some W's as well. And Zhao, who I don't have on my account yet, but also working with HP manipulation, possible that he sees some upticks, and maybe Hu Tao as well. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see exactly how Furina and how the rest of Fontaine interacts. I'm interested. Let me know what you guys think has changed in the meta and what you expect to see in the future. Make sure to save for the Archon if you want her. I think she's going to be super good and super fun. I recently started a second channel called The Jello Show. I just made a banger video on the brand new Star Rail character Jing Liu. If you're interested in Star Rail, or if you're interested in any anime games, I won't be just covering Star Rail. It's just the hot topic right now. I'll also be covering Pokemon, Fire Emblem, Wuthering Waves, Zenless Zone Zero, any new anime games that look interesting to me. I'll be covering them on this channel. So go over and subscribe if you want. Check out my Patreon if you want to support me. Check out our Discord if you want to join a great community. Subscribe to this channel if you want. We just hit 20,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. And if you don't want to do any of those things, that is totally fine. Just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much. Bye for now.